In the next couple of videos, I'm going to be covering wrestling movements. Now keep in mind, in these videos, I'm not necessarily trying to teach you wrestling techniques. These next tutorials are going to be geared in order to help you understand the principles, positions, and movements that are required in order for you to successfully execute the wrestling techniques. There's an expression that goes, if you know where you're going, you're more likely to get there. The same holds true in wrestling techniques. If you know exactly what you're trying to accomplish at any given phase during the execution of a certain technique, you're more likely to successfully get that maneuver. Now let's get started. Okay, so talking about the wrestling stance, it's one of the most critical concepts you have to understand in order to get some good, because everyone that wants to do wrestling, it's always about the takedowns. And although I could spend countless hours of showing you different ways I like to do takedowns, the basics of the basics will always be understanding how to position yourself way before executions of takedown techniques. All right, so once you understand those movements and the positions, then you could start drilling the different moves we have for wrestling. And I do wrestling, but wrestling for jiu-jitsu, wrestling for MMA. I don't do wrestling to become an Olympic wrestler. I've never did, but the wrestling concepts, in my opinion, since back in the 90s when I started training, were always geared in my mind in order to help me become better at mixed martial arts and become better at NOGI jiu-jitsu, for example. Now, the first thing we want to understand is how to position yourself, all right? So the stance will always require you to understand balance. So I always want to have a good stance, having my hips low, my back is going to be straight, all right? So it's very important that your back is not parallel like this. It's not like super vertical, and it can't be parallel to the ground like this, all right? That brings my head way too low. I always teach, when I teach the kids, for example, I tell them, you're not wrestling the floor. You're not going to be wrestling the mats. You're going to be wrestling someone in front of you. So there's no reason for you to duck down and look at the floor like this, okay? One of the most common mistakes is some people, when they start to wrestle, they're going to have their hips or their butt very high, but their head very low like this. And now you're going to be susceptible to being snapped down, all right? So I want to have a correct posture. So that's going to require me to have a nice angle on my back. So imagine that your back is just at a 45 as such like this. So I want to have this position here, and that's going to help me maintain the position of my head, which is also a very critical component of a good wrestling stance, because you want your head and your neck to be nice and strong in this position like this, all right? Now, looking at the feet, I always want to be on the balls of my feet. So I don't want to be on the heels like this, because now I can't move and I'm not balanced. But I also don't want to be rolling over my toes like this, because now, once again, I'm going to get pulled over. So I want to be balanced, but slightly on the ball of the foot. And the heels are going to be slightly raised. That doesn't look like it, but you're not really making contact with your heels at all times. Now, I don't want to have my feet like this. There are times I'm going to be using this. This is called a square stance or the neutral stance, meaning my feet are just positioned side by side as such. This is great for me to move side to side, laterally, you know, to shuffle my feet. But when I want to attack, every time my feet are like this, I'm going to have to switch into what we call the staggered stance. But if I'm facing you as my opponent and you see me doing this, now I've just cued you in and showing you that I'm going to set up a shot. So I want to start my shots at all times in this staggered stance position. All right, so this is going to be a much better position for me to initiate takedowns later on. Now, position of how you're going to position yourself with your hands. A lot of times people are going to have their hands like this. All right, so from the side, I definitely don't want to be giving my hands out like this. And from the front, I also don't want to have giving out like my elbows flared out as such. So from the side, if you're like this, make sure you pull your elbows in. And from the front, if you are like this, make sure you close your elbows close to your body, all right? I always teach people just like a T-Rex, short arms. Now the hands are gonna help you relax the shoulders. So a lot of times when you're like this, you're gonna feel stiff, especially if you're just starting out in grappling or wrestling. You're gonna feel like you're too stiff, so always relax the shoulders. The more the shoulders are relaxed, the easier it is to keep your elbows in. Last but not least is the palms, all right? You don't want to have your hands like this. First of all, by having your palms facing like this, that flares your elbows out. Every time my elbows are open like this, that opens up the shots. So I want to have my elbows closed and close to my body. That way I have my palms to stop shots, forearms and elbows, and it's easier to duck down, protect my legs, and use my head as a defense. Now, the palms, a good trick if you're having a hard time, always remind yourself that you need to clap your hands together. So when I clap my hands, they have to face each other. So this keeps my palms facing the opponent. This is the way I'm going to be grabbing, wrist control, sometimes up, but very rarely I'm going to be grabbing as such, because this is not a good control, plus it flares my elbows out. So when I keep my palms in together, facing each other so I can clap them, now my palms and my hands are facing each other, and that's a correct position to wrestle from here. There's a couple of more pointers I want to cover also, are common mistakes. One of those is when people move, which we'll cover in the next video, but from the stance position, they'll start to move, but their feet weren't placed in the proper position. So imagine I have a line here, and my feet are placed on the same line like this. You'll notice very quickly that I'm not in good balance. If I start to move, whether it's one side or the other, that's going to force me to shift my weight, and I'm off balance before even I start moving to the left or right side or forward or back. I want to have a good balance, so that means that every time I have a staggered stance, I'm not standing on the same line. There's a separation between the 2 feet, and I'm right here looking. And talking about looking, that brings me to another point, which are the eyes. A lot of people, like I covered at the beginning, look towards the floor, look in front, but don't look in front with your head down. Always have a nice posture. So a good trick is where you're going to focus your attention is always on the chest. Don't look at the feet. Don't look at the hands. Don't even look at the eyes. The eyes, I can feint you by looking at your feet, and you're going to think I'm shooting. The hands, I'm always moving my hands like this, right? I'm be pushing on your forehead. So the hands are just deflections. And then the feet, of course, they're going to be moving left to right in the footwork, laterally, in a circle. So you don't want to be looking at the feet. Where you want to be focusing your attention is going to be right here. That's the center mass. If you keep your eyes onto the chest of the opponent, no matter how fast they are with their feet, or even if they start moving their arms all over the place, the center mass always stays in the center, and then you know when it's time for you to shoot your attacks. So don't get deceptions by just how they move their hands or even feints, all right? Always keep that attention span right in the center, and that way they're going to be able to follow your opponent, and you'll be able to know when it's time to go for that shot. Guys, hope you enjoyed this video. This is the first video of wrestling tutorials. I'm just going to make a couple of videos to show you some important concepts that are critical for you to enhance your game, whether you're a wrestler or you're someone who wants to improve the wrestling aspect of your mixed martial arts, your jiu-jitsu. It doesn't really matter. Bottom line, I always recommend, if you want to enhance something, make sure you deep dive into that sport. So for example, if you're a mixed martial artist, don't just practice the wrestling into a mixed martial arts stance. Dive into the wrestling modes of how wrestlers position themselves. Understand deeply how to do the movements, how to position yourself, and then you'll understand the grasp of the principles and the concepts, and then when you add that to your specific game, you'll be that much better. So there you have it, guys, the wrestling stance. Good pointers, good basics for you to keep in mind every time you do some grappling or wrestling. Next time you hit the mats, try to focus on those details. Leave us a like if you enjoyed this content, and if you are new here, make sure to subscribe to this channel for more videos just like this one. Until next time, I will see you in the next video. Take care.